The UFC and its hard-nosed CEO and president Dana White are synonymous with one of the fastest-growing sports in the world, mixed martial arts. But the UFC, and perhaps even the entire sport of MMA, might not exist today if it wasn't for the day when broke and unknown Dana White crossed paths with the infamous and terrifying Boston crime boss, Whitey Bulger. 19 murders are tied to Bulger, and Dana White could have been number 20. But instead, in the early 90s, he dodged that fate, changed course, and took hold of a little-known and controversial fledgling sport and transformed it into today's UFC, a multi-billion-dollar industry that now saturates television and arenas around the world. James Whitey Bulger. He was the leader of South Boston's organized crime syndicate from the early 1970s to the mid-90s. Bulger was a lifelong Boston criminal mastermind who had a 30-year reign of terror in South Boston, also known as Southie. Bulger honed his criminal skills while serving a 3-year stint for a bank robbery in the 1960s in America's most feared prison, Alcatraz. Bulger returned to Boston after his time behind bars, and by the mid-70s, he had risen to be the leader of the feared Winter Hill Gang, which controlled all of Southie through extortion, racketeering, loan sharking, drug trafficking, murder, hijacking, fixing horse races, and dealing arms with the Irish Red Army. Bulger's claws had the tightest of grips on Boston's underworld. His name alone garnered fear in anyone who heard it spoken. Bulger was on top of Southie's crime world in the early 90s when a brash 20-something amateur boxer named Dana White opened his own boxing gym in Southie. White claims he was nobly running the program to get local kids off the streets, out of crime and into the ring. But his gym wasn't making money. So to pay the bills, White started training regular folks in boxing physical fitness classes. He would travel to different Boston health clubs to teach the classes, and his gig grew to be significantly popular in the area. White's success, however, landed him on Bulger's radar. One day, sheer panic struck young White when 2 of Bulger's henchmen suddenly barged into one of his boxing classes. They looked him in the eye and said the words everyone in Southie dreaded: "You owe us money." At that moment, White realized the guy speaking was none other than Kevin Weeks, the right-hand man and top enforcer for Bulger's ruthless organization. Weeks laid it out plain and simple. Pay a $2,500 truck rental fee right then and there. White couldn't pay. The threats and demands for payment went on continuously for some time after this first encounter. Then one fateful day, White got a phone call from Weeks saying, "Pay the money by 1 p.m. tomorrow, or else." White hung up the phone, quickly packed a bag, and immediately booked a one-way plane ticket to Vegas. He never looked back. By 1 p.m. the next day, he was on a plane to Vegas instead of becoming Bulger's 20th murder victim. When White moved to Vegas, he ran into childhood friend Lorenzo Fertitta, who, along with his brother Frank, owned the Station casinos in Las Vegas, an encounter that would prove to be more than fortunate. At that time, the Ultimate Fighting Championship was just at its inception. The new sport was the first of its kind and held its inaugural event on November 12, 1993. The best fighters from various backgrounds like boxing, karate, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, sumo wrestling, and others were determined to prove which martial art was supreme in a wooden caged octagon in a no-holds-barred blood sport. What arose in the aftermath of this chaotic and ruthless melee was a fighting style comprising wrestling, boxing, kickboxing, and jiu-jitsu, the foundation of today's sport of mixed martial arts. As the UFC began to take shape, Dana White quickly saw potential in the sport and broke into the business by managing fighters such as future light heavyweight champion Tito Ortiz. Meanwhile in Boston, Bulger's dominance as an organized crime boss crumbled. He fled Boston on December 23, 1994, and vanished after being tipped off he was being indicted for racketeering, money laundering, extortion, weapons charges, and a slew of heinous murders. He would remain on the run for 16 years, while Dana White would immerse himself in the world of MMA. By the millennium, White learned that the UFC was broke and on the verge of bankruptcy. The entire sport of MMA was dollars away from disappearing, just like Bulger. White, however, concocted a plan to buy the failing company, with a little help from the Fertitta brothers. In 2001, the three acquired the UFC for a mere $2 million. Dana White was given a 10% interest and appointed as the boss of day-to-day operations. White not paying Bulger's $2,500 had been his greatest idea. Later, with the emergence of charismatic fighters like Conor McGregor, Chael Sonnen, and Ronda Rousey, MMA and the UFC reached remarkable success and soon found itself being broadcast throughout the world on outlets like Fox and ESPN. At the same time, Bulger's life on the run came to an end. He was arrested in Santa Monica, California on June 22, 2011. He was 81 years old when he was arraigned on 48 charges, including murder, extortion, money laundering, narcotics distribution, and weapons violations. That same year, the UFC would hold its 141st pay-per-view event, headlined by Brock Lesnar and Alistair Overeem. It would also put on 26 mostly sold-out events involving well-known fighters such as George St. Pierre, John Jones, and Nick Diaz. On November 14, 2013, Bulger was given 2 life sentences on 32 counts, including his involvement in 11 murders. In 2018, he was found viciously beaten to death with his eyes nearly gouged out in a federal prison in Hazleton, West Virginia. He was 89 years old. Today, because Dana White never paid the $2,500 truck rental fee, White has transformed the UFC into a business worth over $12 billion, with monthly pay-per-views sometimes reaching over 1 million viewers, over $1 billion of annual revenue, extensive coverage on ESPN, and a legion of 767 of the best mixed martial artists in the world. Whitey Bulger's terrifying reign in Southie and his run-in with Dana White is now a distant memory. Bulger's been dead for 6 years, and Dana White's net worth now exceeds $500 million. He's the kingpin of the megalithic UFC, a name synonymous with the vastly popular sport. Dana White is the true gangster, with over 400 employees, nearly 800 of the deadliest fighters on earth on his payroll, and a bankroll larger than Bulger's dreams. Who saved MMA? Dana White? Or was it Whitey Bulger?